There is a particular kind of ache that very few people talk about. It is the ache of holding a new baby in your arms, a grandchild, a great niece, a child who has just arrived in your family, and feeling, somewhere deep beneath the joy, that someone is missing. Someone who would have loved this baby. Someone who should have been there at the door of the hospital. Someone whose hands should have been the first to wrap this little one in a blanket, and who, instead, left this world before the baby arrived. If you are sitting with that ache tonight, I want you to know that you are not alone in it. And I want to share with you something that the old wisdom traditions of many cultures have quietly believed for a very long time. That the loved one you lost may not have missed this baby at all. That they may, in their own way, be watching. Tonight, I want to walk through 7 signs drawn from Cherokee, Celtic, Mexican, Appalachian, and other wisdom traditions that many people across many cultures have understood as the quiet presence of a departed loved one near a new child. These are not predictions. These are not promises. No one can tell you with certainty what these moments mean. But the traditions have noticed them. And I think you may have noticed them too. So pour something warm, settle in, and let's sit together with what the old traditions have whispered about the babies who arrive after a loss. You are listening to Backyard Wild Mind, a quiet place for the people who still notice the small, wild lives that share our yards, our windows, and the most tender moments of our families. If this is your first time here, you'll find videos about the cardinals, the butterflies, the owls, the deer that pause and look back, and what the old traditions and a small amount of science say about why they come. Tonight is a tender one, so I want to ask you to go gently with yourself as we walk through this. And stay with me until the 7th sign, because it is the one almost no one speaks about, and the one I believe matters most. The first sign is one that many families have noticed, but very few have named out loud. In the weeks and months after a baby is born, sometimes the very first day the baby comes home, a particular animal begins to appear. A cardinal at the window of the nursery, a butterfly on the porch railing where the bassinet sits, a mourning dove on the fence outside the kitchen, sometimes a deer at the edge of the yard, looking toward the house with a stillness that does not seem ordinary. And in many wisdom traditions across this continent and beyond, this is understood as one of the gentlest forms of presence the departed are believed to keep. In Cherokee oral teachings, as preserved by tribal storytellers in written collections, there is a long-held understanding that the spirits of those who have crossed often return in the form of small, living beings, particularly around the very young and the very old. In Mexican folk tradition, the butterfly is so deeply associated with the returning soul that during Dia de los Muertos, monarch butterflies arriving in central Mexico are believed to carry the spirits of the dead home. In Celtic bird lore, carried across the ocean by Irish and Scottish settlers and rooted in Appalachia, certain birds at the threshold of a home were understood to be ancestors checking on the household. I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret in Ohio. Her mother had passed away in the spring. In August, her daughter gave birth to a baby boy, the grandson Margaret's mother had been waiting for, the one she had knitted a blanket for, the one she had not lived to hold. Margaret told me that on the third day after the baby came home, she was standing at the kitchen window holding the baby, crying in the quiet way you cry when joy and grief arrive at the same time. And a cardinal landed on the sill, not on the feeder, on the windowsill, 6 inches from the glass. It did not fly when she stepped closer. It looked at the baby. Margaret said, and these are her exact words, "It looked at him the way my mother would have looked at him." And I felt her there. I felt her there with us. I cannot tell you what that cardinal was. No one can. But I can tell you that across many of the oldest traditions on this continent, this is exactly the moment they have been describing for centuries. The arrival of a small, wild visitor at the window of a new child in the days after the family has known loss. The second sign is one that many families only recognize in hindsight, and it is, in many ways, the most quietly remarkable. The animal does not always arrive after the baby. Sometimes, more often than people realize, the animal arrives before. In the weeks of pregnancy, or the days leading up to the birth, families often notice an unusual visitor. A bird at the window who was not there before. A butterfly returning to the same flower every afternoon. An owl calling from the woods at exactly the hour the labor begins. Many of the old traditions would say the loved one arrived first to prepare the way. This is one of the oldest teachings in Celtic tradition. The idea of threshold beings, presences that gather at the doorways of life, at births, at deaths, at the moment a soul moves from one room of existence to another. In many indigenous teachings of the Americas, the ancestors are understood to be the first to know when a new life is coming, sometimes before the parents themselves know. And in those teachings, the ancestors often announce their knowing through the small messengers of the natural world. A woman named Linda in North Carolina told me a story. Her father had passed away 2 years before her daughter became pregnant. Linda had been very close to her father. He had loved bluebirds, kept 3 bluebird houses in his backyard for 30 years. In her daughter's 7th month of pregnancy, a bluebird began appearing at Linda's window. Every morning, at the same time, on the same branch. Linda is, in her own words, not a particularly spiritual person. But she said that bird stayed for the entire 3rd trimester. And on the day her granddaughter was born, the call came in the morning that her daughter had gone into labor. The bluebird sat on the branch and sang for almost an hour. And then it was gone. Linda said she has not seen a bluebird at that window since. I cannot tell you what that bluebird was, but I can tell you that the old traditions would say her father knew. Her father came to wait. And when the baby arrived safely, her father went home. The third sign is one that almost every grandparent has noticed, but few have known how to name. Babies, in their first months of life, often look at things we cannot see. They smile at the corner of the ceiling. They follow something across the room with their eyes. They laugh at empty air. They reach toward the wall as if someone is standing there. Modern science has its own explanation for this. Babies are still developing their visual processing. They are drawn to light, to contrast, to movement. Their eyes can register patterns that adult eyes filter out. All of this is true. And the old traditions have another teaching about this, one that many cultures have shared independently on different continents across thousands of years. That babies in the first months of life are believed to still be partly in the place they came from, that the veil, for them, has not yet fully closed, that they can still see the loved ones who came to greet them, and the loved ones who never left. In Mexican folk tradition, there is a phrase, El bebé está viendo a los ángeles. The baby is seeing the angels. In many indigenous teachings, the newborn is described as a being with one foot still in the spirit world. In Celtic tradition, infants were believed to retain second sight for their first months, the ability to see what adults had forgotten how to see. So if you have watched a baby in your family smile at nothing, really smile, not gas, not reflex, and reach toward a corner of the room where you can see only empty light. Many of the oldest traditions on earth would gently say, the baby is not looking at nothing. The fourth sign is the one I think about most often, and I want to share it with you carefully. I have come to believe, after years of listening to families share their stories, that one of the most tender signs of all is what happens when a baby sleeps. Specifically, what happens on the face of a baby who is dreaming. You may have watched this. Most grandparents have. The baby is deeply asleep, and across their tiny face, a whole conversation seems to be happening. A smile, a small frown, eyebrows lifting, lips moving, a laugh sometimes, a whole silent dialogue with someone we cannot see. Science calls this active sleep, the equivalent of REM sleep in adults. It is when the developing brain is processing, organizing, building itself. All of this is true, and all of this is real. But many of the old traditions have looked at this exact moment, this expressive, conversational dream sleep of a newborn, and they have said something else as well. They have said, the baby is visiting, or being visited. That in the deep sleep of the very young, the soul moves more freely than it ever will again, and that the loved ones who could not be here in this room meet the baby there. In Lakota teachings, as shared in published accounts by tribal elders, there is a long understanding that a newborn's dreams are not yet their own. They are shared dreams. Dreams in which the ancestors come to greet the new arrival, to whisper the names of the people who have been waiting for them. In Japanese folk tradition, there is a saying about babies who smile in their sleep. Someone is loving them from the other side. A woman named Susan in Oregon wrote to me. Her younger sister had died of cancer at 34. 2 years later, Susan's daughter, who had been her sister's favorite person in the world, had a baby, a little girl, named in part after the sister. Susan said the baby smiled in her sleep more than any baby she had ever seen. Smiled, laughed quietly. Once, with closed eyes, reached one tiny hand up toward the ceiling and held it there for almost a minute. And Susan said, in the quietest voice, "I know what I felt in that room. I cannot prove it, but I know my sister was holding her." I cannot tell you what was happening in that room. No one can. But the old traditions have been watching babies sleep for a very long time, and they have all, in their own ways, said the same thing. The baby is not alone in the dream. The fifth sign is one that families often dismiss as coincidence, and the old traditions would gently ask you to look again. Sometimes a baby arrives with something of the loved one already in them. A gesture, a way of tilting the head, a laugh that sounds exactly like a laugh that has been gone from this world for a year, or 5 years, or 20. A grandfather who used to rub his eyebrow when he was thinking, and now the grandson does it too, though he never met his grandfather. A grandmother who hummed a particular kind of soft tune, and now the granddaughter hums it in her crib. A particular kind of stillness, a particular kind of attention. You know what I am describing. Most families do. Modern science would offer explanations. Genetics, inherited temperament, recognized patterns we did not consciously notice. And those explanations are not wrong. But many traditions across the world have understood this differently, not as the loved one being the baby, but as the loved one being present in the baby. A continuation, a thread. In many indigenous teachings of the Americas, there is an understanding that we carry our ancestors in us, not just in our DNA, but in our bearing, our gestures, the small involuntary motions of how we move through the world. When those gestures appear in a new child, the ancestors are said to be visible again. In African traditions of many lineages, the same teaching has been carried for thousands of years. The elders are not gone. They are walking in the children. So if you have looked at the baby in your family and seen the eyes of your mother, or the smile of your father, or a gesture so specific that it took your breath away, many of the oldest wisdom traditions on earth would say, you are not imagining it, you are recognizing it. And the framework, of course, is yours. You decide whether this fits. You decide what it means. The sixth sign is the most subtle, and in many ways, the most beautiful. It is this. Sometimes, when the baby is being held by someone who is grieving, a kind of calm arrives in the room that no one can explain. The grandmother who has been crying for weeks holds the baby for the first time, and something settles. The mother who lost her own mother only months ago places the baby on her chest, and something eases. Not the grief. The grief does not go away, but something underneath the grief loosens its hold, just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. Science has begun to study this. There is real research on the calming hormonal effects of skin-to-skin contact with a newborn, the release of oxytocin, the lowering of cortisol, the way an adult's heart rate physically synchronizes with the baby's. All of this is documented. All of this is true. But the old traditions have noticed something more, and they have noticed it for centuries. In many wisdom traditions, a newborn is understood to carry a kind of presence, a peace that radiates outward, and the grieving heart that holds them is understood to be touched in that moment by everyone who loves that baby, including the ones who can no longer be in the room. The calm is not only the baby's. The calm is the gathering. So if you have held a new baby in your family, a grandchild, a great niece, a child who arrived in a season of loss, and felt a peace come over you that you had not felt in months, the old traditions might say that you were not alone in that chair. They might say that everyone who loved you both was there. And now we come to the seventh sign, the one I told you at the beginning that almost no one speaks about. It is this: sometimes the loved one you lost is not watching over the baby from somewhere far away. Sometimes, the old traditions say, they are watching over the baby through you. In several indigenous traditions of the Americas, in Celtic teachings, in older Christian mystical writings, there is a thread of belief that the departed are sometimes near, not by hovering invisibly in a room, but by moving through the living. The grandmother who pulls the blanket up over the baby in exactly the way her own mother used to. The father who hums a song he did not know he remembered. The aunt who reaches for the baby in a particular way and feels in her hands a memory that is not entirely her own. The old traditions would say, this is how the dead love the living, through the hands of the ones who are still here. You are the way they hold the baby. I want you to sit with that for a moment. If you have lost someone before this baby arrived, a mother, a father, a sibling, a partner, and you find yourself doing small, tender things for this child that feel almost beyond you, tendernesses you did not know you carried. Many of the oldest wisdom traditions on earth would say, that is not coming from nowhere. That is the love of the one who is missing, expressing itself through the only hands left in the room. Yours. And the framework, as always, is yours. You decide what fits. You decide what to carry. You decide what to believe. But the traditions have noticed this for a very long time, in many languages, in many lands. Before we close tonight, I want to say something directly to anyone who is listening from a particularly hard place. If you have lost a baby, a pregnancy, a child, a grandchild, please know that I have been thinking of you throughout this video. I cannot tell you what the loss of a child means. No one can. If you are sitting in fresh grief tonight, please be gentle with yourself. The crisis text line is 741-741. The number to call is 988. There are people awake right now who will sit on the line with you. You are not alone in this room. If this video has meant something to you tonight, if the loved one you have been missing has felt a little closer than they did an hour ago, I would be grateful if you would consider subscribing to Backyard Wild Mind. This is a small, quiet channel made for people who still notice the wild lives and the quiet wonders that share our days. Every subscription, every comment, every quiet share helps us keep telling these stories. You can also tap the bell if you would like to be gently notified when the next quiet visit arrives. Before you go, if you would like to, tell me in the comments below, was there someone you lost before a baby arrived in your family? Was there a sign, a bird, a butterfly, a dream, a gesture, a moment of calm that made you feel they were still here? Tell me. I read every one, and the people who are looking for these stories find each other in those comments, which is, I think, one of the gentler miracles of this small corner of the internet. The loved one you lost did not miss this baby. The old traditions, in all their different voices, have whispered the same thing for a very long time. Love does not leave the room. It only changes the chair it is sitting in. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Thank you for loving the ones who came before and the ones who have just arrived. I'll see you in the next quiet visit. This has been Backyard Wild Mind. Good night.